Hi, my name's Lisa. Welcome to How Tuesdays at Lori's Country Cottage. Today we're going to talk about how to do free motion quilting. The best advice I ever got on free motion quilting was that when you start, it's going to look horrible. And they were right. And so I'm going to pass that information to you. But I promise, with work and time and practice, your stitching will get better. I desired to learn free motion quilting because I started doing applique quilts, and I wanted to do free motion quilting around all my little pieces. I didn't want to do a blanket stitch around 1,000,000 pieces on my kabloom wall hanging. So I needed to learn free motion quilting so that I could stitch all those little pieces down without having to manipulate my quilt all the way around. So how I started to learn? Well, I got some good resources, and these are a couple of my favorites. This book in particular, Free Motion Quilting 1, 2, 3 by Lori Kennedy. There's also a book 2, is a fabulous resource. So she goes through everything you need to know for free motion quilting, and then you also get patterns. You can see my highlighting in my book. She teaches you all the tips and tricks that you need, and then when you get to patterns, they're numbered. She shows you the direction and which step to take, how to join them. So you get lots of patterns in the book, borders, corners, how to work yourself out of a corner. And this is another great book. It includes both free motion and walking foot on your domestic machine quilting. So again, Natalia Bonner, but excellent instructions, colored. So what order to do and how to join designs. So that's all fine and good to have all your pretty little ideas, but actually getting them onto your fabric is a bigger challenge. So I took an online course, and I want to show you what I believe has made me most successful. I got myself an artist drawing book, and I physically, with a pencil, practiced every design. And if I came across a design I didn't like or was horrible, it got an absolute cross through it. I'm never going to do that. I also included notes as I went along. Sometimes I numbered. For instance, there's numbers all in these designs so I could help remember. So those are all the different patterns. And once I went through several patterns, I actually practiced the designs on large pieces of paper, because the challenge for free motion quilting is, how do I not cross my threads when I get to a corner? How do I move left? How do I move right? How do I move up? How do I move down? So if you practice in a notepad, it kind of gets your brain in the gear of working around those challenges. The other thing that I did that made me super successful and really helped my brain think about how free motion quilting works is I taped a pencil to my sewing machine where my needle would be. So normally when we're drawing, we're moving the pencil. With free motion quilting, the pencil is standing still and we're moving the fabric. And so we need to make a pathway in our brain to understand how to do that. So I taped a pencil to where my needle goes on my sewing machine. I took my paper and I physically moved my paper to get my brain to learn how to work moving my paper or my fabric instead of moving the pencil. So those are some of the tricks to kind of getting started. But again, the most important thing to learn is that it's not going to be pretty when you start. It's a new skill and you're going to need to practice. And I am just barely proficient. So what do you need for free motion quilting? I have a domestic machine It does have a larger opening. The keyhole opening is a little bit larger than a low line machine, so that does make it somewhat easier for free motion quilting. But I did free motion quilting on my older machine, which had a smaller opening. You'll see on the machine my Supreme slider. So this is simply almost like a rubberized mat that's very slippery on here, so it helps your quilt to slide. So that's the Supreme slider. Something that's very similar to that is the So Steady Grid glider. So it's the same thing, just a different company. It's very similar in size, and its purpose is to help your quilt slide on your sewing surface. You also need free motion gloves. And I brought my original, these are my original Machinger gloves. They are machine washable, and yes, I have washed them. But that black just doesn't come out, and I don't know why. It's probably the glue from all my applique, but they work totally fine. The important thing about your gloves is that they need to be tight to your fingers, so you don't have any loose fabric there. And Machingers have grips on the finger, so it helps to grip your fabric. So you're going to want some free motion gloves. You also are going to have the right supplies for your machine. So I use top stitch needles when I'm free motion quilting. When I'm doing any kind of quilting of layers on my quilts, I either use quilting needles or top stitch needles, and they're similar in a couple of ways. Quilting and top stitch needles have longer point, so they're more tapered and it's a longer point, but most importantly, they have a larger eye to allow the thread to move up and down as it's going through all the layers of your quilt. You don't need that when you're piecing because your layers are very close together. So if I'm doing straight line quilting with the walking foot of my sewing machine, I would usually put in the quilting needle, but if I'm doing free motion quilting, I always use a top stitch needle. It just has a larger eye. Now, does that mean that's what you should do? No, that's what works right for me. The top stitch needle works great in my machine. The other thing you need is thread. What kind of thread to use? So today I have 40 weight thread in my machine. It's a variegated thread, and 40 weight thread is a little bit larger, so it's a bit more visible. You can use 50 weight thread, you could use 80 weight thread, you can use any thread you want. To me, what makes me most successful is that my bobbin thread and my top thread are the same weight. It doesn't mean you can't do it other ways, but that's what works best in my machine. And I will just add that I very often free motion quilt with invisible thread both in the top of my machine and in my bobbin. In my past machine, my last machine, I did have a separate bobbin case where I adjusted the tension to make me more successful, but in my newer machine, I don't even have to adjust the tension to do that. So, enough blabbing. Let's sit down at my machine and let's see if I can give you some tips and tricks. All right, I'm getting all set up to do my free motion quilting. So this is the Supreme slider, and this is the So Steady Grid glider. I took it off of my machine because I forgot mine at home today and I didn't want to use the store's Supreme slider, but normally I would have it on here. Something else that I do, especially if I'm doing a large quilt, I like to do some of the Westerly ruler work that Sharon teaches, and so Westerly So Steady has a product, it's a table polish. So I use this polish on my acrylic table and it just makes it more slippery, which will stop the drag from my quilt. At home, normally my machine would be set, I have a small table that my machine is set down on. And I set up tables around so I have a large surface for my quilt to be supported. And I use silicone spray on those surfaces. So I spray the silicone spray on a rag and I simply wipe the top of my tables. How much does it help? I don't know, but every little thing that helps me is something I'm going to try. So my sewing machine has a setting for free motion quilting. I hit a button, and when I hit the button, my feed dogs go down. And that is necessary for free motion quilting. You don't want your machine to be pulling your quilt. You want to move it any way you want to. So if you don't have a free motion setting on your machine, you probably have a switch, a sliding switch somewhere to drop your feed dogs. And that's what you need to do for free motion quilting. If you don't even have that, a piece of cardboard or tape covering your feed dogs will do the same thing. But you do need to leave your needle plate hole open. You'll also notice on my machine, I have my single hole needle plate on. That is better for free motion quilting. It just allows your fabric to move less so that you're more accurate. Let's get ready to stitch. All right, I'm ready to stitch. I have a fairly small quilt on my quilting bed today, but I want to show you how to work with the bulk inside your sewing machine. So I didn't want to use just a 20-inch square. Anybody can quilt on that. So when I'm free motion quilting, I am trying to coordinate the speed that I'm moving my fabric with the pressure I'm applying to my foot pedal so that my stitches are even. Just a little bit about ergonomics and being comfortable when you're quilting. Your arm should be kind of a 90-degree angle, and try and stay relaxed. Now, that's almost impossible because when I start to quilt, I'm going to pull my fabric taut, and now I kind of lock my arms and I move like a robot to quilt. And I'm going to show you what that looks like, and then I'm going to show you something that changed my free motion life. So here I go. Just remember, I am not a professional. So I'm going to try and coordinate the speed of my foot with the speed of my hands. And your brain is doing something different because I'm moving the quilt as opposed to moving the pen. And when you need to move your hands, you need to stop. Oh, I should have it in the needle down position. Re-anchor your hands and quilt along. So I'll just show you. I'm going to move this direction so that my quilt builds up inside and you can see what that's like. But here's how to move when you're quilting. Time to reset my hands. You can do loops. Time to reset my hands. All right, I'm going to cut my thread and show you a tool that's made it so much easier for me to free motion quilt. All right, let's get started. The first thing we need to do is bring up our bobbin thread because we don't want a little knot on the bottom. So if you put your needle down, bring your needle up, and give a little tug, your bobbin thread will come up. And pull it to the top. And I like to hang on to it and move it out of the way. And then I also like to drop my needle right into that same hole. Nope, my needle is down. There we go. And now I'm going to start. So I have an option. I can just start quilting, moving right away, and then I know I need to bury these threads when I'm all done my free motion quilting to help secure them. Or when I start, if I just give my quilt just the slightest 2 or 3 stitches in the same spot, it creates a tie off on its own, and then it's easier to bury those threads. So here I go. A couple stitches, I won't move, and then I'll get going. And that created a tie off. And now I'm trying to keep the pressure on my foot very steady, and I can adjust my hands And when it's time to reset, I stop and reset my arms. Now, as I'm quilting along and I have all the pressure of my quilt, I start to get tension in my shoulder and my neck because I'm pulling out and I'm locking my shoulders. Let me show you something that's really changed my quilting game. So these Martelli free motion quilting hoops changed my quilting life. They really did. They make it so much easier for me. So each of these hoops, and they're quite weighty in your hands, has a grip strip on the bottom. Comes in 2 sizes, so I use the little one when I'm doing mini work, but on a big quilt I would use the large hoop. It's got a cutout here so that you can fit it into your machine. So all I do is move it to the back of my machine. I have to lift my presser foot, and it's stuck on something, there we go, and slide it on. Now I'll flatten out my quilt, anchor my hoop, and it's got little handles for me. Now I don't need to do this motion with my hand holding my fabric flat because my hoop is doing it for me. All I have to do is move my quilt. Let me show you how it works. I'm going to do my little tie-off stitch. My machine keeps my thread on the bottom from tying a knot. So here it goes. Again, the most important thing to remember is when I get to the end of my quilting sequence to stop and reset. So here I go. Hands on the knobs. Now see how I'm getting close to the back? I'm going to stop, reset my hoop, and off I go. Now I'm going this direction to show you what happens when you run into the wall. So I'm not paying attention and all of a sudden I'm at the wall. Stop, reset your hoop. And here I go. I can move this direction some more. And I can work forward. And when it's time to reset, stop and reset. And as I work, I will just roll my quilt this way. Let me show you a bit more. One thing I certainly have not mastered in free motion quilting is following a line I've already sewn. Let's try it. Hey, that's better than I've ever done before. I'm going to stop before I mess up. When it's time to move your hoop, remember to stop, reset your hoop. Let's try some straight lines. We'll do bricks. When you do corners, you have to remember to stop and then turn the corner. I'm running out of hoop, it's time to stop. Move my hoop, make sure it's not underneath, and off I go again. I sure wouldn't have shot this video 2 years ago. There's no way I would have let you see my free motion quilting. Oh, running out of hoop, it's time to stop. Let me show you some work on the little hoop. So here's the little hoop. Great for miniatures or small spaces, or when you're doing fine work like pebble work. So again, I'm going to start with my locking stitches and then move that out of the way, do some pebble work. Isn't the best thing to show with variegated thread because you see every twist and turn, but that's okay. So with the Martelli hoop, I have so much less stress and I feel more control, and I'm running out of hoops, so I stop and reset. Thanks for joining me today for How Tuesdays at Lori's Country Cottage. I hope I inspired you and maybe gave you some confidence to try free motion quilting again. Like I said, it's a skill that needs to be practiced before you can get good at it. I feel fairly comfortable doing free motion quilting now. I'm not perfect, I'm not even good, but I'm happy with my work. But the Martelli hoops really changed the game for me. So if you've tried free motion quilting and you're not really happy with your results, I suggest you try the Martelli hoops. They really make a difference. Thanks for joining me. I hope I've inspired you.